Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere you probably didn't expect for a bedtime story, the edge of the world, where the ocean meets an endless wall of ice. And believe it or not, a small, bobbing boat once served as an official post office. Yes, a floating post office. You might think that's a charming idea, but if you'd actually been here back then, you'd quickly realize you might not survive the first day without 15 layers of clothing and a strong tolerance for frowning eyelashes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment below telling me which city you're in and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing those little dots of the world where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on the deck of a weather-worn ship. The air's so sharp it feels like it could slice your cheeks. The sea around you is a sheet of fractured silver, chunks of ice drifting lazily by, each one carrying its own miniature landscape. Ahead, the horizon is interrupted by something unexpected, a modest, two-masted vessel painted a cheerful white and green, with a wooden sign swinging from the rail. In plain, blocky letters, it reads, Post Office. It doesn't look like much, certainly not the grand stone building you picture back home here, hundreds of miles from the nearest permanent settlement. It's as grand as any cathedral. A couple of sailors in thick woolen coats are busy tying the boat to a larger hunk of ice, their breath blooming in clouds that vanish into the Antarctic wind. You lean against the rail, watching the whole scene like it's part of a stage play. A man in a cap, clearly the postmaster, steps out of the cabin, a letter mailbag slung over his shoulder. It looks far too light to be impressive, but inside are letters that have traveled an almost comical number of miles from London, Sydney, Buenos Aires, even from a little fishing town in Norway. And each one is here because someone, somewhere, thought of a friend or family member freezing on the edge of the planet. The history books will tell you that the floating post office wasn't some whimsical tourist trap. It was a practical solution. In the days before satellite phones and reliable radio, mail was the emotional lifeline of Antarctic expeditions. You might spend months without hearing another human voice outside your crew, so a single envelope could carry enough warmth to melt a week's worth of snow. Of course, historians still debate whether this specific postal experiment was more symbolic than functional. Some argue it was mostly a morale booster, a bit of pageantry to make the isolation feel less infinite. But whether or not it delivered life-changing news, it definitely delivered something. The sense that the rest of the world had completely forgotten you. The postmaster spots you and waves, gesturing you over like an old friend. The gangplank is narrow and icy under your boots, but you make it across. Inside the cabin, the air smells faintly of ink, old rope, and strangely enough biscuits. There's a small counter, a wooden box for outgoing mail, and a wall plastered with stamps from every corner of the globe. You can almost imagine them fluttering away like tiny flags in the wind, each one a reminder that even here, in a place that feels outside of time, there's a thread connecting you to home. The postmaster's gloved hands move with the deliberate care of someone who's been doing this for years, perhaps decades. That here, in Antarctica, his work feels almost like a magic trick. You hand him a small bundle of letters, each one already addressed, each one a thin attempt to bridge thousands of miles of sea and ice. He flips through them with a nod, making sure the stamps are in place. You notice something curious. Every envelope bears a special Antarctic postmark, crisp and circular, with a tiny illustration of a penguin standing beside an anchor. It's not just function now, it's collectible. Somewhere in the world, stamp enthusiasts would probably pay more for that little circle of ink than the cost of shipping the letter itself. He tucks your letters into a leather pouch and reaches for another palette. This one incoming mail. You can't help but peek. The handwriting varies wildly, elegant cursive, hurried scrawl, tidy block letters. A few are written on thick, cream-colored stationery, clearly sent by someone who takes pride in the old-fashioned ritual of letter writing. One has a faint lipstick kiss on the corner. You pretend not to notice. The postmaster catches your glance and chuckles. These aren't just messages, he says. They're proof someone cares enough to fight the weather, the seas, and the postal bureaucracy to reach us. He's right. Getting a letter here isn't just a matter of tossing it in a mailbox. It's a relay race across the world. First, it's sorted in a city post office somewhere far away, then flown or shipped to a southern port, then handed to the crew of a supply vessel, and finally transferred to this small, stubborn floating office bobbing in the icy swell. One misconnection, and the whole chain collapses. You wander to the rail of the ship and look out at the horizon. There's no land, and suddenly a jagged wall of ice in the far distance, glinting in the low sun. Somewhere behind that wall, scientists are conducting experiments in labs colder than your freezer back home. Some are studying penguin migration. Others are drilling ice cores to read the planet's climate history. And all of them, at some point, will line up eagerly for their turn with the mail. Historians still argue over the exact reason this floating post office came to be. Some say it was an improvised solution to a logistics problem when the main base's communications failed. Others claim it was a calculated morale project by the postal authorities, part service, part publicity stunt to remind taxpayers back home that their government was still present in the far south. The truth, probably a bit of both. Like many things in history, the official explanation is neat and tidy, but reality is far messier and a lot more human. You imagine the feeling of being one of those scientists, months without a familiar voice, meals that all taste faintly of canned goods, and a view that hasn't changed in weeks. Then suddenly, a letter arrives, a few pages of ink on paper, and it's enough to make the room warmer for the rest of the day. That's the thing about mail here. It's not just correspondence. It's contact with a life you can only half remember in the silence of the Antarctic night. Back inside, the postmaster carefully hands today's incoming pouch on a hook by the door. Delivery in 2 hours, he says with the quiet authority of someone who knows the schedule depends entirely on the whims of the sea and sky. Out here, there's no such thing as guaranteed delivery. There's only the weather's permission. 2 hours, that's what the postmasters say, but here in Antarctica, time is less a fixed number and more a polite suggestion. You step back onto the deck, and the cold immediately wraps around you like an overly affectionate, slightly aggressive blanket. The sea is calmer now. Long, slow swells roll under the boat, making the horizon gently rise and fall. From the starboard side, you catch your first glimpse of the harbor, if you can even call it that. It's a flat stretch of sea ice, dotted with a few crates, barrels, and, inexplicably, a wooden sled leaning against nothing in particular. There's no pier, no welcoming committee, just the sound of the ice groaning under its own weight. Yet, somehow, this is where the mail handover will happen. As you wait, movement catches your eye along the edge of the ice. At first, you think it's just the wind playing tricks on your vision, but no, it's a line of penguins, waddling single file toward the ship, like they've been hired as a greeting party. They stop a few meters short of the gangplank and stare in perfect, slightly judgmental silence. One of them tilts its head, as if wondering why humans need so many layers of clothing when a feather tuxedo seems to do just fine. The postmaster joins you, squinting at the penguins. They're here every time, he says, as if it's the most normal thing in the world. Don't ask me why. Maybe they're just nosy. You're tempted to wave at them but settle for a small nod, feeling oddly self-conscious under so many tiny black eyes. Soon, a group of men appears in the distance, trudging across the ice from a low cluster of prefabricated huts. They're hauling sledges piled high with mail bags, some for delivery, some to be sent back home. The closer they get, the more you notice their pace, steady, practiced, utterly unfazed by the cold. You, on the other hand, have already lost feeling in at least 2 fingers. As the exchange begins, the process is quick but deliberate. Outgoing mail is handed over first, disappearing into the ship's hold, while incoming letters are distributed to the men for the walk back to the station. You watch one of them tear open an envelope on the spot, his breath fogging the paper as he reads. Whatever's inside makes him grin, and suddenly the whole expedition feels a little more human. There's a beauty in the way this ritual plays out. No rush, no frantic schedules, just the quiet acknowledgement that the act of giving and receiving news is worth braving the elements. Historians still debate whether this setup was the most efficient way to handle communication, especially given the cost of running a boat just for mail. Some say the resources could have gone to more important operations. Others insist that in a place like this, morale is every bit as vital as fuel or food. You can't help but side with the latter. Watching the smiles, the handshakes, and even the occasional awkward laugh between station crew and shipsmen, you realize this isn't just about letters, it's about proof of life, proof of connection. Out here, where the world feels both impossibly far and painfully close, a stamped envelope is more than paper, it's a tether. By the time the last bag is swapped and the sledges are reloaded, the penguins have already wandered off. Clearly unimpressed by human logistics, the men turn back toward their huts, mail in hand, disappearing slowly into the white. The postmaster claps you on the shoulder. Next runs into weeks. He says, "You're already wondering what stories those future letters will carry." 2 weeks, it sounds manageable in the comfort of a temperate city. But here, where days blur into a long stretch of ice and sky, 2 weeks can feel like 2 months. You stay aboard the floating post office, curious to see how it works when it's not docked to an ice shelf. The crew moves in a quiet rhythm. Someone stokes the stove, another checks the ropes securing the vessel, while the postmaster sits at a narrow desk, sorting the last of today's deliveries. You notice a bundle of letters set aside from the rest. The envelopes are slightly warped, the ink on some smudged. Those, the postmaster explains without looking up, are from last season. They got stuck in transit as trapped the supply ship for weeks, and by the time the mail made it here, the intended recipients had already gone home. He shrugs. We still forward them. A late letter is better than none. There's something bittersweet in that idea. Words written for a moment that's already passed, still making their journey across the globe. The room smells faintly of sealing wax, sea salt, and damp wool. On the desk sits a wooden stamp press, its handle worn smooth from years of use. Each letter is carefully postmarked, the ink pad kept warm in a tin box, so it doesn't freeze solid. The sound of the stamp hitting paper thump, lift, thunk, lift becomes oddly soothing, like a metronome for this drifting workplace. Occasionally, the radio crackles to life with weather updates. The voice is distant and monotone, reporting wind speeds and ice conditions. The postmaster listens without changing expression. If the wind shifts south, we'll have to move, he says. A floating post office is only as good as its anchor ice. You glance out the small window, suddenly aware that the solid-looking platform beneath you is just frown-seam seawater, liable to crack, drift, or melt without warning. Historians are still split on whether this constant mobility made the service more efficient or more precarious. On one hand, the boat could reach multiple research stations without requiring them to trek over dangerous ice. On the other, its very existence depended on unpredictable weather and ice stability. As one Antarctic researcher reportedly put it, our post office was both everywhere and nowhere at the same time. That evening, you joined the crew on deck. The sun hangs low, casting a pale gold light over the sea, and the wind carries the faintest scent of salt and cold metal. Somewhere in the distance, a slab of ice caps from a glacier, the deep crack echoing like distant thunder. The postmaster leans on the rail beside you. "You know," he says, "I once saw a letter travel from here to Argentina in under 10 days, and I've seen another take nearly a year to reach London." He chuckles softly. Speed is relative out here. Below deck, The small heater hums, warming a space barely larger than a pantry. A kettle rattles on the stove, and someone passes you a mug of tea so strong it could double as ship's varnish. You sip, watching the postmaster write neat entries in a log book. Every piece of mail is recorded, not just for accuracy but for a story, because someday, when this floating post office is long gone, these pages will be the only proof that it ever existed. The next morning begins in silence, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, muffled quiet that comes when snow is falling so thick you can barely see the bow of the ship. The world outside the cabin windows is reduced to shifting shades of white, and the occasional shadow of an iceberg passing like a ghost. You step onto the deck and feel the snowflakes stick to your eyelashes before melting against the warmth of your skin. Somewhere far off, the sea is still moving, but here it feels like the whole planet has paused. Inside, the postmaster is inspecting the mailbags. Cold's one thing, he says, but moisture is the real enemy. He lifts a letter from the bag, and you can see the faint bloom of frost along the edges, like tiny lace patterns in the paper fibers. To keep them readable, the crew uses a surprisingly low-tech method. Each mailbag is lined with a layer of wax canvas, and in especially bad conditions, they tuck in packets of dried rice to absorb the damp. It's the sort of trick your grandmother might use to keep sugar from clumping, except here, it's preserving someone's handwriting from vanishing forever. You pick up a small stack of incoming postcards. The ink glistens slightly, a sign they've been written recently, maybe in the southern ports just before departure. One shows a bright tropical beach, almost taunting in its warmth, addressed to a geologist currently camped out on the ice shelf. Another has a drawing of a kid wearing a sailor's hat, sent by a 6-year-old who clearly believes their parent is on a grand adventure, rather than shoveling snow in -20 degrees. The postmaster flips through his logbook, noting which deliveries will go out today. We'll make a short run to the eastern station, he says. Weather permitting. You've already learned it, that those two words, weather permitting, carry more weight here than any timetable. On the way, the floating post office passes clusters of ice floes, some dotted with seals sprawled like oversized commas in the sentence of the sea. One raises its head as the boat hums by, sniffs the air, and goes back to its nap. You can't help but think the seals have the right idea. Historians still puzzle over how mail from this floating office maintained such surprising reliability despite conditions like these. Some argue it was the discipline of the postal staff. Others credit the coordination between supply ships and research stations. And then there are those who say it was sheer luck, a chain of well-timed weather windows and good fortune. No one can fully agree, but maybe that's part of the charm. By midday, the snow thins, revealing the pale blue sky and a stretch of ice leading to the eastern station. The approach is careful to much speed, and the hull could scrape against hidden ridges. Once moored, you watch the exchange happen in reverse. New mail loaded aboard, old letters handed to the station crew, each sealed pouch treated as if it holds something far more precious than paper. Before departure, one of the scientists presses a package into the postmaster's hands. It's wrapped in plain brown paper, corners perfectly folded, tied with string. No label. It's for my wife, the scientist says. She'll know it's from me. The postmaster nods, jotting it down in the log. And you realize that here, in this place of endless cold, the smallest gesture can feel monumental. The eastern station fades into the distance, shrinking to a speck against the white horizon. Back on the floating post office, the routine resumes. That there's a kind of quiet satisfaction in the air. Mail days have that effect. Even the hum of the small diesel engine feels steadier, as if the ship itself approves of the successful exchange. You follow the postmaster into the cramped storage cabin, where shelves are lined with canvas sacks, wooden crates, and a tin labeled biscuits not for human consumption. He catches your glance. For the dogs, he says with a smile. They can't exactly go to the galley for a snack. You almost forget that some Antarctic stations still keep sled dogs, for hauling gear until the faint bark from the shore reminds you. On one shelf rests a box filled entirely with stamps, each one featuring an image of Antarctic life, glaciers, penguins, explorers in bulky coats. Some are standard issue, others are special commemoratives printed just for the floating post office's short-lived existence. The postmaster lifts one carefully. "This one's rare," he says, pointing to a tiny image of the very ship you're standing on. "Issued for our first season. Collectors go wild for it." You can see why. It's more than just a piece of paper. It's a tangible reminder that this improbable service actually happened. And for some people, owning this stamp is like owning a fragment of history. Historians still debate whether these commemorative issues were a practical way to fund the operation or just a clever publicity stunt. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. In the corner of the room, a small desk serves as the stamping station. The postmaster works with quiet precision, aligning each envelope before pressing the postmark into place. The ink smells faintly metallic. Watching the process, you realize each stamp is like a handshake between two distant points on the map, the cold silence of Antarctica and the warm noise of somewhere far away. Later in the day, the weather shifts again. The sky takes on a dull steel hue, and the wind picks up, rattling the rigging. The crew responds in practice unison, securing loose ropes and checking the anchor ice. You lean on the rail, looking out at the faint line where sea meets sky. Somewhere beyond that line are all the destinations these letters will travel to, cities you've never seen, kitchens you'll never sit in, conversations you'll never hear, but are about to happen because of what's in those envelopes. Before night settles, the postmaster sits with you in the galley. He pours 2 mugs of coffee, black, strong, and vaguely suspicious in flavor, and tells you about the time a mailbag slipped overboard. "We thought it was gone," he says, "but a week later, it washed up near the station. Not a letter ruined. Sometimes the ice gives things back." The lights inside the cabin glow, warm, against the deepening blue of the Antarctic evening. Outside, the sea shifts under the boat, carrying you toward the next exchange. You find yourself wondering how long this place this strange, stubborn little post office can keep moving before it's claimed by the same ice and sea it serves. The next morning greets you with a low fog rolling across the water, so thick it feels like you could lean forward and rest your chin on it. The world has shrunk to a circle no more than a few dousing meters wide, the rest hidden behind a curtain of pale gray. Somewhere out there, icebergs drift silently, their shapes and sizes left entirely to your imagination, which, unhelpfully, keeps making them bigger and closer. The postmaster moves about as if nothing's changed. "Fog's easier than wind," he says, sealing another letter with a firm stamp. "At least fog doesn't push you into the ice." You decide to take his word for it. From the rail, the water looks calm, but you know that beneath its surface, currents twist and pull with a mind of their own. It's during this pause in travel that you notice something unusual in one of the mailbags, a series of tiny, brightly colored envelopes. They're child-sized in every way, small handwriting, cheerful stickers of stars and flowers, even a few with smudges of what might be chocolate. "School project," the postmaster explains. "Kids from a town in New Zealand wrote to the scientists here. Every year, the replies get pinned up in their classroom." You imagine the excitement of those kids when an envelope arrives with a stamp from Antarctica, proof that their words crossed oceans and ice to reach a place they'll likely never visit. In the galley, one of the crew is reading his own letter aloud. It's from his sister, a short note about how the family dog is getting older and refuses to come inside during rainstorms. The others listen quietly, some smiling, some lost in their own thoughts. You realize that here, mail isn't just communication, it's a temporary escape, a thread that pulls you back into a warmer, softer world. Historians still debate whether these personal moments justified the expense of keeping the floating post office operational. Critics argued it was little more than a novelty, but those who experienced it firsthand insist the psychological value was immeasurable. Morale. One former crew member once said, "Isn't a luxury in Antarctica, it's survival gear." By midday, the fog begins to lift, revealing a horizon lined with jagged ice ridges. The sun appears as a weak, pale disk, offering light without warmth. The postmaster stands beside you, scanning the distance. "We'll make for the western station," he says. They've been waiting 3 weeks. The way he says it, you can hear the weight of those 3 weeks. Every day without mail stretches a little longer in a place where distractions are few and silence is constant. As the ship turns, you catch sight of a single penguin floating on a small piece of ice, looking faintly confused by your passing. It watches you until you're out of view, then disappears into the gray water with a graceful dive. The image lingers with you, a reminder that out here, everyone human or noticed just a traveler on shifting ground. That night, anchored in a sheltered bay, you help the crew stack sealed mail bags by the door, ready for the morning's delivery. The postmaster marks the last entry in his logbook for the day and closes it with a soft thud. "Tomorrow," he says, "someone's going to smile." Morning arrives with a pale sun barely skimming the horizon, casting long, thin shadows across the ice. The floating post office sits in a rare pocket of stillness. No one, no waves, just the soft groan of distant glaciers shifting in their sleep. You step out onto the deck and see the western station in the distance, a cluster of low buildings huddled together as if they, too, are trying to stay warm. The crew lowers the gangplank onto a solid sheet of sea ice, its surface so smooth it reflects the sky like frosted glass. A pair of station staff approach, hauling sledges behind them. They wave as they draw near, their breath forming plumes in the cold air. The postmaster meets them halfway, the mailbag slung over his shoulder. The exchange begins in the familiar rhythm. Outgoing sacks to the ship, incoming sacks to the station. You catch sight of a particularly large canvas bag and raise an eyebrow. "Christmas cards," one of the station staff explains. "Though it's already late January, it takes a while for the season to catch up here." The thought makes you smell holidays on Antarctic time. Among the incoming mail is a crate wrapped in tarpaulin. The station leader signs for it, then leans in conspiratorially. "It's fresh fruit," he whispers, like a child admitting to hiding candy. "We'll save it for Saturday dinner." The way his eyes light up, you'd think the crate held treasure, and in a way, it does. Out here, the taste of something fresh is almost mythical. Back on the ship, the postmaster sorts through the outgoing letters. Many are short and practical updates on weather, requests for supplies, but a few are personal. One is written in delicate, looping handwriting and begins with, "My dearest, I hope the ice has been kind to you." You find yourself wondering about the person who will read those words, and how they'll carry them through the long winter ahead. Historians still argue over whether the floating post office's biggest achievement was in moving mail or in moving hearts. The statistics, so many letters were delivered, how fast, are easy to record, but the intangible things, like the relief on a scientist's face after hearing from home, are harder to measure and impossible to forget. As the last bag is secured, a small commotion breaks out on the ice. A curious skua has landed near the sledges, poking at a loose rope. The bird hops closer to the crate of fruit, clearly intrigued. One of the station staff shoos it away, muttering under his breath. The skua leaves reluctantly, but not before stealing a glove someone dropped. The postmaster shakes his head. Every port has its thieves. By the time the gangplank is pulled up, the sun has begun its slow descent, stretching the shadows even longer. The ship turns toward open water again, the ice creaking under the shifting weight. You watch the station grow smaller, knowing the people there are already sorting through their mail, reading words written in places that must feel like another planet. That night, in the quiet hum of the cabin, you realize something. This floating post office isn't just delivering letters. It's delivering proof that even at the very edge of the world, someone is thinking of you. By now, you've learned that in Antarctica, The real postmaster isn't the man with the stamp says the weather. And today, the weather has decided that the floating post office will not be going anywhere fast. Overnight, a sheet of pack ice has drifted in, locking the ship into a slow, grinding embrace. It's not dangerous, at least. Not yet, but it means the crew will spend the day chipping, nudging, and coaxing the vessel free. From the deck, you watch as they use long poles to push chunks of ice aside. The sound a strange mix of crunching snow and clinking glass. The postmaster, unbothered, sits in the cabin with the door open, stamping letters as if the world isn't quietly trying to immobilize his workplace. Mail doesn't stop just because the ship does, he remarks, sliding another envelope into the outgoing pile. You take a turn at the poles, though your efforts mostly result in sending small ice slabs spinning in lazy circles. A curious seal pops its head up through a nearby gap in the ice, watching with the unblinking patience of someone who has absolutely nowhere else to be. It lingers just long enough for you to wonder whether it's judging your technique. By midday, the ice shifts enough for the ship to inch forward. The engine rumbles low, pushing through narrow lanes of open water. It's slow progress, but even a few meters feel like a small victory. In the galley, lunch is served, a stew that tastes faintly of both fish and optimism. The crew eats without hurry, swapping small stories, some about past voyages, others about letters that arrived decades late but still found their recipients. Historians still debate whether the floating post office's biggest operational flaw was this very vulnerability to ice. Some believe its flexibility outweighed the risk, allowing it to reach isolated stations more easily than land-based routes. Others argue that a fixed, ice-bound office would have been more dependable. As with most things here, the answer is somewhere in the middle, half planning, half hoping. After lunch, the postmaster shows you a logbook from the previous year. The entries are brief but strangely poetic. February 3, clear skies. Penguins loiter near gangplank. Delivered 40 letters. Or July 17th, storm delay. Crew restless. Read aloud letters from school children. Each note is a snapshot of a day, small in detail but enormous in the context of this remote place. By evening, the ice loosens enough for the ship to slip free entirely. The sound of open water against the hull is almost musical after a day of muffled grinding. Standing at the bow, you can see a strip of darker blue ahead, a promise of easier travel. The postmaster joins you, his breath clouding in the chill. Funny thing about this job, he says, some days you deliver the mail, other days the ice delivers a reminder of who's in charge. The sun dips low, brushing the ice with soft pink light. Somewhere out there, the next station waits, its mailbags ready, its people counting days, its stories folded neatly inside envelopes. The next station on the route is a small, wind-battered outpost that looks more like a cluster of shipping containers than a permanent base. As the floating post office approaches, you can see a line of flags drawn between the poles, bright scraps of color snapping in the wind. They're not for decoration. They're there so people can find their way back in a whiteout. Out here, even walking from one building to another can be a navigational challenge. The postmaster readies the outgoing sacks, while the crew maneuvers the boat alongside a patch of ice stable enough to hold the gangplank. This station doesn't have sledges. Instead, two researchers arrive pulling a bright red plastic toboggan loaded with incoming mail. You can't help but smile. It looks more like they're delivering holiday gifts than weather reports and supply requests. One of the researchers hands the postmaster a bundle wrapped in oilskin. Inside is a stack of postcards, each one a little damp around the edges. We wrote them last month, she explains, but the wind kept us pinned here until now. You picture these cards sitting in a small hut for weeks, waiting for the skies to settle, each one a frowning moment in time, already a little out of date before it's even left the continent. Among the outgoing mail is something unusual, a rolled-up banner. The fabric faded and frayed. The station leader explains that it's their old base flag, being sent back to headquarters for safekeeping. We replaced it last week, he says. But this one's been through more storms than any of us. You imagine it arriving in some faraway office, where it will be neatly folded and stored, its history reduced to a label in a cabinet. Still, it will have made the trip home last voyage after years of fluttering in the Antarctic wind. The postmaster checks each pouch before it's stowed on the ship. Moisture's the enemy, he mutters again, inspecting seams for frost. Then, with the last bag loaded, the researchers step back, raising gloved hands in a casual salute. There's no drawn-out goodbye. Everyone knows the boat will be back eventually, and time here is too precious to spend on ceremony. Historians still wonder whether these smaller, scattered stations were the real reason the floating post office existed at all. The main bases could rely on bigger supply ships, but these outposts needed something nimble enough to navigate narrow ice channels. Without it, some might have gone months without mail. Critics called the system inefficient. Those who depended on it called it essential. As the boat eases away from the ice, you notice a solitary Adelie penguin standing near the edge, watching the departure. It doesn't move until the ship is a distant shape against the white. You find yourself wondering whether it's the same penguin you saw weeks ago or whether, like the male, the habit of greeting and farewelling just passes from one local resident to another. Back in the cabin, the postmaster writes the day's entry in the logbook, his pen scratching steadily over the paper. 56 letters, 1 flag, 3 parcels. He reads aloud. Then he snaps the book shut and leans back in his chair, the faintest smile on his face. Good day. The weather turns fickle again the following day. Clear skies in the morning, a stiff wind by noon, and snow flurries by mid-afternoon. You've stopped trying to guess what's next. In Antarctica, the only forecast you can trust is change. Still, the floating post office pushes on, cutting through narrow channels between ice floes. The water here is a dark, inky blue, the kind that makes you feel like you're skimming over the surface of another planet. The postmaster spends most of the morning preparing a delivery for one of the more remote research huts, a place so small it doesn't even qualify as a station. Population 3, he says with a grin, and they've been without mail for over a month. The delivery bag is like just a handful of letters, one slim package, in a packet of newspapers from home. You can imagine those scientists reading about events that have already come and gone. The headlines like messages from the past. When you arrive, the hut is barely visible against the ice, its exterior painted white and gray to blend in with the surroundings. A single figure emerges, waving both arms in greeting. The postmaster goes ashore with the bag, boots crunching through the snow. You follow, noting how the wind picks up tiny grains of ice and hurls them against your coat like pinpricks. Inside the hut, the warmth is immediate, the air heavy with the smell of strong coffee and diesel from the small generator. One of the residents tears into his letter on the spot, scanning the page with a grin. Another holds her envelope for a moment before opening it, almost like she's savoring the weight of it in her hands. This is from my sister, she says quietly. She writes slow, but worth the wait. The slim package turns out to be a replacement part for their weather instrument small enough to fit in your palm, yet vital for their ongoing research. Without it, their data collection would have been frozen in more ways than one. Historians still debate whether the floating post office was more important for personal morale or scientific operations. Moments like this make it clear the answer is both. As the postmaster collects outgoing mail, one of the hut's residents produces a postcard addressed to a school in Chile. It's covered in sketches of penguins, sea ice, and the 3 scientists themselves, bundled up in matching red parkas. They wrote to us last year, she explains. Figured we should return the favor. The postmaster carefully adds it to the outgoing pouch, his gloved hands moving with practiced care. Back on the ship, the cabin feels warmer than usual. Maybe because the delivery went so smoothly. The postmaster writes his log entry, through residents. Mail delivered, equipment part received, all in good spirits. It's as straightforward as ever, but you can hear the satisfaction in his voice. That night, the sea is calm enough for you to stand on deck and watch the sky. Above, the southern lights ripple faintly in shades of green and violet, like someone is painting across the heavens with a slow, deliberate brush. You think about the three people in that hut, reading their letters under the same sky, and it strikes you how mail like can travel incredible distances just to reach a small point in the vast dark. The next leg of the route is the longest stretch without a stop, which means more time to settle into the strange rhythm of life aboard a floating post office. Days are marked not by hours but by tasks sorting mail, checking charts, logging coordinates, and occasionally stepping outside to chip ice from the railings before it gets too thick. You find the postmaster in the sorting room, humming softly as he works through a pile of outgoing envelopes. These are going north, he says, separating them into neat stacks. Some will pass through New Zealand, others through South America. If we're lucky, most will be home in a few weeks. You think about those letters making their way from the silent white here to cities buzzing with traffic, neon signs, and late-night cafes. It's like sending bottled messages across different worlds. Halfway through the morning, the ship's radio crackles. A weather update warns of incoming katabatic winds, a sharp, fast-moving air current that can descend on you with almost no warning. The captain adjusts course slightly, aiming for a stretch of calmer water along the coast. The postmaster barely glances up from his work. We'll keep stamping until they tell us to hold on to something, he says with a shrug. You help him sort a batch of incoming mail, noting the variety of stamps. Some are crisp and modern. Others look as though they've traveled half the world before finding their way here. One letter is covered in mismatched stamps from 3 different countries, each one canceled separately, a visual map of its journey. Historians still debate whether the complexity of these routes was a logistical marvel or a bureaucratic headache. The truth, as usual, is probably both. Later, the crew gathers in the galley for coffee and a slice of dense fruitcake that tastes faintly of rum. It's a tradition. The postmaster explains fruitcake lasts forever and is therefore perfect for a place where supply runs are unpredictable. Someone jokes that a slice mailed from here could probably survive the trip and still be edible upon arrival. The afternoon passes quietly until a sudden shout from the deck wails. You rush outside in time to see a small pod of orcas surfacing near the ship, their black and white bodies cutting through the water with ease. They linger just long enough for a few photographs before sliding back into the deep. The postmaster, watching beside you, smiles. Not many post offices get visitors like that. As night falls, the winds pick up, rocking the ship in a steady rhythm. The postmaster locks away the day's sorted mail in a watertight cabinet, patting it like a prized possession. Tomorrow, he says, we'll reach the big station. They've been waiting for something special. He doesn't elaborate, and you decide not to ask. Whatever it is, it will make sense when you see it. You return to your bunk, the sound of the sea against the hull like a slow heartbeat. Somewhere in the dark, hundreds of letters are ready for their next leap across the world, each one carrying a piece of this floating post office's story. By sunrise, the big station comes into view, a sprawling complex by Antarctic standards, with several long buildings linked by covered walkways, and a tall antenna stabbing the sky like a frowning exclamation mark. From a distance, it almost looks like a small industrial town, except for the fact that the surrounding landscape is nothing but snow, ice, and the muted shimmer of heatless sunlight. The ship eases into position alongside a reinforced ice dock, one of the few places on the route sturdy enough to handle heavier cargo. Waiting at the edge are half a down-seen station crew, bundled in parkas that make them look like walking sleeping bags. As soon as the gangplank drops, they're hauling mailbags onto the deck, talking in short bursts that vanish into the wind. There's something special. The postmaster hinted. It turns out to be a wooden crate, carefully strapped and marked handle with care. He opens it just enough for you to peek inside. Rows of glass bottles filled with golden liquid olive oil, he says, as if revealing a rare gem. They've been cooking with powdered everything for months. This'll make them feel like royalty. It's a reminder that out here, luxury is often measured in the most ordinary items. Inside the station's common room, the mail is spread out on a long table. Crew members drift in, scanning the piles for their names. One man flips through a magazine so old its latest news is from last year. Another opens a box and finds a pair of thick wool socks, holding them up like they're spun from gold. You spot someone tucking a small, wrapped gift into their parka before slipping quietly out of the room. The postmaster handles the outgoing mail. Next, several heavy bags, a few small packages, and a rolled-up blueprint for a new research lab. Historians still debate whether stations like this benefited most from the floating post office because of their size or in spite of it. Larger bases had other ways to receive goods, but the floating post office added a personal touch, delivering not just supplies but connection. As you step outside, the station leader approaches with a stack of envelopes tied together with twine. These are for the schools back home, she says. The kids love hearing from us. The postmaster promises they'll be on the next ship north, then tucks the bundle carefully into his satchel. Before departing, you take one last look at the station. The covered walkway snaked between buildings like protective arms, and the antenna hums faintly in the cold air. It's a place built entirely around the idea of endurance, enduring the cold, the isolation, and the long wait for news from elsewhere. Back on board, the postmaster logs the day's deliveries. 3 mail bags in, 4 out, 1 crate olive oil, blueprint dispatched. He leans back in his chair, satisfied. They'll be talking about that olive oil for weeks, he says, a small smile curling at the edge of his mouth. As the ship pulls away, the station recedes into the endless white. In a few days, those letters and packages will be heading north, carrying stories of this frowning place to people who may never see it, but will still feel a little closer because of what arrives in their mailbox. The days after leaving the big station feel quieter, as if the floating post office itself is catching its breath. The route now winds past stretches of coastline, where the ice cliffs tower like frowning cathedrals, their faces streaked with blue from centuries of compressed snow. Every so often, a section cuts into the sea with a deep, resonant crack that you can feel in your chest more than hear. In the sorting cabin, the postmaster is going through a small pile of letters that somehow didn't make it into the last delivery. Happens more often than you think, he says. We'll forward them north. Still better late than never. One envelope catches your eye. The address is neatly written, but there's no return name. Those are the ones I worry about, he murmurs. If they can't be delivered, they just vanish into the system. The ship makes a brief stop at a supply cache used by multiple expeditions. There's no permanent staff for it, just a small hut stocked with emergency food, fuel, and now a small locked box for mail. You help carry a handful of outgoing letters to the box, each one labeled with the intended station. It's like leaving breadcrumbs in the snow for whoever comes next. Back aboard, the postmaster pulls out a folder of stamped designs. Some are old issues, faded around the edges, while others are pristine proofs that never made it into circulation. One shows the floating post office itself framed by a circle of penguins. Limited run, he says. Half went to collectors before they ever saw a letter. Historians still discuss whether these stamps were a clever fundraising tool or simply a way to immortalize the service. Either way, they've become part of its legacy. In the galley that evening, the crew trades quiet stories over mugs of tea. Someone recalls a letter that arrived here in perfect condition after surviving a flood in a South American port. Another tells of a postcard written on a scrap of driftwood, stamped directly onto the wood grain. and somehow accepted by postal services all the way to Canada. The postmaster chuckles. The rules bend for Antarctica. They always have. Later, you step outside and lean against the rail. The sky is a pale wash of silver. The horizon so faint it seems the sea just dissolves into the air. Somewhere ahead lies the final station on this one's last delivery. Before the ship turns back north, you realize you've started to think of these letters not just as mail, but as pieces of cargo that carry something weightless yet heavy, the proof that someone is remembered. As you head back inside, the postmaster closes the log book for the day with his usual quiet finality. One more stop, he says. There's a note in his voice, part anticipation, part reluctance, as though each delivery brings them closer to the end of something rare. The final stop on this run is a small coastal station perched on the edge of a long, narrow inlet. From a distance, it looks like it's clinging to the land for dear life. The buildings clustered on a strip of rock just wide enough to hold them. The sea ice here is thinner, shifting gently with the tide, so the crew anchors a little farther out and uses the ship's smaller boat to ferry the mail. You join the postmaster for the ride in, the small boat rocking with each swell. The inlet is calm compared to the open sea, the water dark and mirror-like, reflecting the gray sky above. As you draw closer, you can see a few figures waiting near the shoreline, 3 in bright orange parkas and 1 in a weathered wool sweater, waving both arms like they've been expecting this moment for weeks. The mail handover is almost ceremonial. Outgoing sacks are stacked neatly by the dock. Incoming ones are carried aboard the small boat with extra care. One of the station crew hands over a battered tin box, dented but still locked. "Letters from last winter," he says. "Found them in storage when we cleared the supply hut." The postmaster raises an eyebrow but accepts it without comment. Out here, the mail always finds its own strange schedule. Inside the station's common room, the air is warm and heavy with the scent of wood smoke from the small stove. People cluster around the mail table, calling out names, sliding envelopes across to friends. A young biologist opens a package to reveal a jar of honey, grinning as if someone had just delivered sunlight in a glass jar. Another man unwraps a set of gloves knitted in deep green wool. He slips them on immediately, flexing his fingers as though testing armor. Historians still debate whether these small, remote deliveries were worth the effort and fuel they consumed. The numbers say one thing, the faces around this table say another. You can feel it in the way people linger over their letters, reading slowly, as though each word has to be savored. When the postmaster collects the outgoing mail, one of the crew hands him a single postcard with nothing on it but a drawing of a penguin wearing a mailbag. "For you," the man says. The postmaster tucks it into his coat pocket, smiling quietly. Back on the floating post office, the last mailbag is secured, and the logbook receives its final entry for this voyage. Mail delivered to all stations. 1 tin box recovered. Spirits high. The postmaster closes it with a soft click of the pen and leans back in his chair. "That's the run," he says, and for the first time, the cabin feels just a little bit too still. As the ship turns north, the shoreline slips away into the fog. Behind you, those letters will be read, tucked away, maybe even kept for years. Ahead lies the long journey home, and with it, the knowledge that for a brief time, a small boat in the coldest place on earth carried the warmest cargo imaginable. The air feels different now, less sharp, more open as the floating post office begins its slow northward journey. The deck is quieter. There's no stack of outgoing mail to sort, no eager faces waiting on the horizon. The postmaster moves at an ornery pace, tidying the stamping desk, closing drawers, and securing the bundles of unused stationery in their boxes. The little wooden sign that reads post office still sways from its hook, but without the bustle of deliveries. It feels almost like a relic. You stand at the rail, watching the icy coastline drift farther away. The white cliffs dissolve into pale mist, and the inlet you left behind becomes just another notch in the jagged edge of the continent. It strikes you how temporary the whole thing isn't just this voyage, but the post office itself. In a few years, maybe months, it might be gone entirely, remembered only in stamps, logbooks, and the stories of those who worked here. The postmaster joins you, carrying 2 mugs of tea. This is the part nobody talks about. He says, "Oh, quiet after the run. You spend weeks connecting people to the world. Then suddenly it's just waiting to get home." His voice is softer now, the energy of the route replaced by something more reflective. Below deck, the crew settles into an easy rhythm maintenance work. Shared meals, the occasional card game. In the evenings, the galley light spills into the corridor, painting everything in a warm amber glow. The postmaster sometimes sits at the table, leafing through letters that were undeliverable, reading them in silence before tucking them back into their envelopes. You don't ask what's in them. Some things are meant to remain between the sender, the page, and the Antarctic air. Nights grow longer as you head north, and the stars return, sharp and bright against the black. The ship's wake cuts a steady line through the water, a ribbon of white foam fading into the dark. The cold is still there, but it's gentler now, the kind that wraps around you instead of biting. You realize that this is how the story ends up, with a final delivery or a dramatic farewell, but with that steady, quiet retreat toward warmth. Somewhere ahead is the port where the letters will scatter across the world, finding mailboxes and kitchen tables, desk drawers and shoe boxes. And somewhere behind you, the ice is closing in again, erasing the traces of where you've been. So you breathe a little slower, lean a little heavier on the rail, and let the hum of the engine and the rhythm of the water pull you toward sleep. Out here, the journey home is just as much a part of the story as the deliveries themselves.